We want to talk about reincarnation, something that in Judaism a lot of people are not so familiar with. Some people are troubled by this notion. They think maybe it's not Jewish. They think it's associated more with the Eastern religions, even though it actually has a very old tradition in Judaism, in the Torah, straight from the Tanakh, really going back to the Tanakh itself. We see reincarnation. So reincarnation is a legitimate Jewish thing. It's straight out of the Torah. Even the Chumash, even the Torah of Moses, if you know where to look, speaks about reincarnation. So that's what we want to uncover, this ancient tradition of reincarnation that was hidden for a while in Jewish texts, but is now available everywhere in the past, since the Zohar really, and even a little bit before that, but certainly in the past 700 years since the Zohar was published, reincarnation in Judaism is actually an open secret. And once you understand reincarnation, it makes sense of everything else in the Torah, as we shall see. So where does reincarnation, how do we know that reincarnation is a thing? Where does it come from? In the Tanakh itself. Is there a scriptural source for reincarnation? Any ideas? Where do you see in Tanakh? Like an explicit, not an allusion. I want like an explicit, clear verse that says, here is reincarnation. Like straightforward, no need for interpretation. Just one verse that clearly tells you that there's reincarnation.
And his children?
Not quite. So there is this verse in the book of Job, in Eov. Eov, very mystical book, very philosophical book. You remember the story of Eov? Eov is this like righteous, seemingly very righteous, upstanding man. And he has everything. He's got it all. Life's good. And the book begins with Satan coming to God and asking essentially for permission to go and abuse Eov a little bit, or a lot actually. And God grants him permission. Why does Job merit such terrible suffering? He loses everything. His children die and his house collides and he's sick and he's like, it's just horrible. And the Tanakh itself doesn't explain why did Job merit all this? How did he deserve all this suffering? So actually we're going to need reincarnation for that, to explain Job's past life, which we'll get to. But after all this suffering, all these afflictions that come upon Eov, he kind of loses faith a little bit, right? And he gets angry and so on. And then his friends, he has 3 of his friends that come to try and kind of comfort him and reason with him and try to keep him on the derech and not to lose faith. You remember this? And so it's like all this chapter after chapter of Eov and the 3 friends going back and forth, talking to each other. And finally, a 4th voice emerges, or a 5th, I guess. A 5th voice emerges, a 4th friend, who's Elihu. And Elihu comes and basically puts everybody in their place. And he's the one that's talking logically and coherently and explains exactly what's going on before God himself enters the picture and confronts Job. So Elihu tells Job, he says this, as he's trying to explain to Job why all this suffering is happening to him and that he shouldn't lose faith, this is what he tells him. Hen kol ele yifal el. This is what God does 2 or 3 times with a person. What does he do? The following verse. Lehashiv nafsho mini shachat. To bring back his soul from the grave. Le'or be'or ha'chaim. To bring him back to the light of life. So again, Elihu is telling Eov, listen, you want to know what's really going on? Look, God does this. Lehashiv nafsho mini shachat. It's pretty clear. God brings back a soul from the grave 2 or 3 times to give that person life again, to bring them back to the light of life. That's a pretty explicit source for reincarnation. Soul is God will actually return a soul from the grave, back to life, back into the light of this world, to try again. And he says 2 or 3 times God will do this. Where does he get this? Can we find a parallel to this in the Chumash itself? Right? In the book of Job, we are told that God brings a person back 2 or 3 times into this world to try again. Is there a source for this in the Chumash itself? Did Moses say anything about this?
Exodus, when I bring punishment or calamity to this 3rd or 4th generation.
Good, exactly. So we read in the 13 attributes, the midot, We say this all the time in our prayers, right? It's in Tachanun. We say it all the time. What are the 13 attributes of Hashem? That's right. Remember when God reveals himself to Moses on Mount Sinai, right? So it's Exodus chapter 34, right? After the golden calf. Vayavor Hashem al panav vayikra. Right? And it goes the 13 attributes. Hashem, Hashem, El Rachum v'chanun, El Chapayim b'rav chesed v'emet. Right? Notzer chesed la'alafim. He does kindness for thousands. Notzer chesed la'alafim. And then? Good. And he is noseh avon v'fesha v'chata'a v'nakeh, and he takes sins and he passes them on. Poked avon avot. He takes the sins of the fathers and passes them on. Al banim ve'al bnei banim, al shilashim ve'al ribeim. God takes the sins of the parents and passes them on to the children, to the third and fourth generation. Now, the seeming pshat here is that God takes a person's sins and carries them on to their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. That's what it seems to say, right? That's how we tend to understand it. But does that actually make sense? Why does that not make sense?
Because it's not halacha.
But why does it logically... Exactly. Why should children pay for the sins of the parents? What do I have to do? I never even met my great-grandparents. Why do I have to suffer for the sins of my great-grandparents? What if I'm a tzaddik and they were Rishaim? Why do I have to suffer for their sins? It doesn't make sense, because why should a person suffer for the sins of their great-grandparents that they didn't even know? That's not just. God is supposed to be all justice. And elsewhere in the Torah, we read the exact opposite. Because later in Dvarim, in Deuteronomy, what does it say? Lo yumtu avot al banim, ubanim lo yumtu al avot. Right? Children should not be put to death because of their parents, and parents should not suffer for their children. Ish bechet'o yumatu. Every person dies for their own sins. Every person suffers for their own sins. In the same Torah of Moses. So here it seems to say that sins pass on from parents to children. But then in Dvarim, Moses is pretty clear. He's saying, no, what are you talking about? Everybody pays for their own sins. Parents shouldn't pay for the sins of their children. Children shouldn't pay for the sins of their parents. Everybody dies for their own sins. Which makes sense. That's how it should be. I have free will. God gave me free will. I make my choices. I suffer the consequences, good or bad. Other people's sins shouldn't directly affect me. That's not fair. That doesn't make any sense. So this is where the Arizal comes in, and he says, what does that mean? Poked avon avot al banim al shilashim ve'al ribeim. That God passes on the sins of the fathers to the children, to the third and fourth generation. Put it together with what Job said. Job says God brings back a person 2 or 3 times. Notice the phrasing. The language is actually the same. Over there, Job says, hey, God brings back a person 2 or 3 times to try again. And here, it seems to say God is passing on sins to the third and fourth generation. Put 2 and 2 together. If I came into this world and I didn't do what I was supposed to do, so God brings me back. I go again. This is my second time. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. God brings me back the second time, pa'amayim. That's my third now attempt at life. Still didn't go well. God brings me back the third time. So meaning 3 times I came back, that's 4 generations that I've lived, right? I've lived now in 4 different lifetimes. The Arizal says that's what it means. Poked avon avot al banim al shilashim ve'al ribeim. That's what it means that God carries on, rolls over your sins to the third and fourth generation. Your own sins. That's what it means. It's not that somebody else's sins pass on to you. That doesn't make any sense. Your sins will pass on the next time you come around. You're born again into this world with the baggage from your past life to the third and fourth generation. You get 4 tries. God gives you 3 strikes. 3 strikes and you're out. Right? So you live once. If you fail, you get 3 more chances. The main textbook of reincarnation is the Arizal's Shara Gilgulim. Right? It's about 500 years old. There's another book which I've quoted before many times, a Sefer Gilgulei Neshamot, which is by Rabbi Menachem Azaria Di Fano, an Italian Kabbalist who studied with the disciple of the Arizal. And he actually had a printing press in Italy. He's called the Rama Mifano. And he actually played a key role in spreading the teachings of the Arizal because he was actually able to print them from the original manuscripts. So he studied with Rav Israel Saruk, who was Israel Sarug was the disciple of the Arizal, who after the Arizal died, he went to Italy and taught the Rama Mifano, who had the printing press, who spread the Arizal's teaching. So the Rama Mifano wrote a book called Sefer Gilgulei Neshamot, which is different because it just goes in alphabetical order and tells you who's the reincarnation of who and why, which is actually very fascinating. It just goes alphabetically. So Shara Gilgulim is the Arizal's teachings, which were written by another student, Rav Chaim Vital. Right? The Arizal himself didn't write anything. We actually have 2 written documents of the Arizal that were found in the Cairo Geniza, and it has his signature on them. And they're both business contracts. Okay? So he was also a merchant, he was a businessman. And so the only things that we actually have handwritten from the Arizal, with his own signature, you can look this up, is his trade agreements that he had for various buy and sell things that he was selling, spices and silks and things like that. So that's all we have from the actual handwritten Arizal. But then his students wrote down, because he didn't live that long, right? He died when he was maybe 37, 38. And interesting, because Yitzchak at the Akedah was 37, and the Arizal is Rav Yitzchak Luria. And we talked about last time, the Akedah, Yitzchak was 37 years old. Remember we said this last time? He was 37 at the Akedah, he got married at 40. So Rav Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal, passed away around age 37, interestingly enough. And we talked about he talked about himself as being a potential Mashiach ben Yosef. Interestingly enough, and remember that connection to Yitzchak and Mashiach ben Yosef.
Arizal said he thought he was a Mashiach?
Yeah, Mashiach ben Yosef. Yeah. Well, as far as Rav Chaim Vital writes it, Rav Chaim Vital writes that the Arizal told him that he was of the generation, the Mashiach ben Yosef of the generation, and Rav Chaim Vital was the Mashiach ben David of the generation. As far as we know from Rav Chaim Vital's own account, yeah.
So how much credence can we take to that, since the fact is that they were not Mashiach, neither one of them?
They were the potential of their generation. Every generation has a potential. So, this is what the Arizal says in Shara Gilgulim, or what Rav Chaim Vital writes in Shara Gilgulim. We're going to now distinguish these things about reincarnation. Gilgul is reincarnation. Le'tzadik u'lerasha. The difference between a righteous person and a wicked person. Ki pa'amim re'inu she'ena gilgul noeg ela ad shlosha gilgulim. So sometimes, the Arizal says, sometimes it seems like reincarnation only happens 3 times. Like we saw with Job, like we see in the Torah here, that there's only 3 reincarnations. Besod pa'amayim shaloshim gaver. As it says in Job, the Arizal's quoting that same verse in Job, right? Pa'amayim shaloshim gaver. That implies only 3 reincarnations. So the Arizal says, look, this verse tells us that reincarnation only happens 3 times. Ubesod al shlosha pishei Israel ve'al arba'a lo ashivenu. He brings another source. We have another source from the Tanakh for reincarnation. From the prophet Amos, one of the Trei Asar, one of the 12 prophets. Amos says, Ko amar Hashem, thus says God, al shlosha pishei Israel, for 3 sins of Israel, I have patience. Ve'al arba'a lo ashivenu. But 4, I don't bring back. So that's what Amos is saying. Amos is saying, for 3 sins, I bring back. For 4, lo ashivenu. I don't bring back for 4. So again, we're consistent here. Just like Job said, you get 4 tries at life. 1 life and 3 possible reincarnations, you get 4. Here in Amos it says 4. There Moses said in the 13 attributes 4. It's all consistent. Throughout the Tanakh it's consistent. You have 4 chances. So the Arizal says, look, here we keep seeing 4. Ubesot poked avon avot al banim al shilashim ve'al ribeim, which we already quoted. So the Arizal gives us those 3 verses. That is a proof that you get 3 chances, 3 reincarnations, or 4 chances, 3 reincarnations. And then he says, but we also find that tzaddik itgalgel ad 1000 darin. But a righteous person could reincarnate 1,000 generations. 1000 darin, you can keep going. Up to 1,000 times. 4 times, 4 generations is for the wicked person, which is the meaning of poked avon avot. אבל למי שעושה חסד לאלפים, לגלגולים לאוהביו ולשומרי מצוותיי. So for that there's another verse that he's quoting now, that for tzaddikim, you can reincarnate even 1,000 times. Assuming that you're improving with each lifetime, you can keep going. You can reincarnate even 1,000 times. And that is the meaning of notzer chesed le'alafim. So when we say in the attributes of mercy that God extends his kindness to thousands of generations, notzer chesed le'alafim, that means that as long as you keep improving in each reincarnation, you're on the path to being a perfect tzaddik, you can keep coming back, even 1,000 times. But if it's a person's a rasha, and they're getting worse with each reincarnation, you get 3 strikes and then you're out.
What happens when you're out?
We'll get to that too.
Not good.
And so the other verse that he quoted from Shemot, it's in chapter 20, earlier in Shemot, where Moshe writes, Ki anochi Hashem Elohecha el kana poked avon, avot al banim al shilashim ve'al ribeim, similar terminology, lesone'ai, to those that hate me. God is saying, I pass on the sins to those who hate me. Ve'oseh chesed le'alafim le'ohavai, but to those who love me, I extend kindness to thousands of generations, uleshomrei mitzvotai, and to those who at least attempt to keep my mitzvot, they will keep coming back even 1,000 times, because in that case, God's kindness is everlasting. Okay, the Arizal continues. So what happens after you fail 3 times, or a person failed 3 times? So your 4 generations are up. Now what? So, generally speaking, a person doesn't go to Gehenom. He needs to come back to purify for his sins. He needs to come back in a reincarnation. Ki al kol avon ve'avon asher yesh lo, shelo nitchapru lo al yedei isurin bechayav, וגם לא נכנס בגיהנום לקבל עונשו עליהם, צריך גלגול אחר לכל עוון מהם לתקנו. So, he's saying that for every sin that you have, that you didn't already pay for in this world. So he's saying the isurin bechayav, the afflictions that you get in this world, they count as a punishment, right? Like slowly, you're suffering for your sins in this world. Assuming that when a person dies, their bank account is still more sins than what they suffered, then they're just going to keep coming back to this world until the bank account is basically even. And they're not going to Gehenom. They're coming back. Tzarich gilgul acher lekol avon mehem. So he's going to keep coming back to rectify his sins into this world. ולכן הוא מתגלגל גלגולים רבים, לכפר ולתקן עוונותיו. This is for the tzaddik. So for the tzaddik, he's going to keep coming back for every sin. He'll keep, as long as he's improving, he's going to keep coming back to rectify his sins. מה שאין כן ברשע. But this is not the case for the wicked, שנכנס לגיהנום, who will go to Gehenom, ומתמרקים שם כל עוונותיו יחד. And over there, he'll be cleansed. So you get 3 chances to clear your own sins. And if you don't, then God's going to clear them for you. At that point, you will be sent to Gehenom. At that point, you get a trip through hell, and you get a washing machine, and they cleanse you from your sins. And then he doesn't need to come back again. So Gehenom is really a last resort. If you are righteous and you keep improving, you keep coming back and slowly rectify with each generation, even 1,000 times or more. A wicked person, if they keep getting worse, you get 3 strikes, then you're out, and then you get a trip to Gehenom where the cleansing will be done for you. And of course, how long is this cleansing? Remember we said the Mishnah says in Eduyot that there are 5 dvarim shel 12 chodesh, that there are 5 things that last 12 months. And one of them is where are we? I'll read the whole thing. Mishpat Dor HaMabul, the flood was 12 months. Mishpat Iyov, so there's Job again. Job suffered for 12 months. How long did that period last in the book of Job that he was suffering? 12 months. Mishpat HaMitzriim, 12 chodesh. We know the Exodus, prior to the Exodus, from the time Moses came back to the Exodus, the 10 plagues elapsed roughly over 12 months. Mishpat Gog uMagog, Le'atid Lavo, which we discussed at length and exhausted that topic. So Gog uMagog lasts 12 months. And then Mishpat Rashaim beGehenom, and the suffering, the judgment of the wicked in Gehenom, it's 12 chodesh, is 12 months. And then another opinion says not even 12 months, even less than that. Mina Pesach ve'ad ha'atzeret, the length of time from Pesach to Shavuot, which is 50 days. So there's even a minority opinion. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says it's just 50 days really. But the consensus is, the Mishnah says, that the suffering of the wicked in Gehenom is up to 12 months. It's clear. Yeah, and that's also why the custom is to say Kaddish for, up to a year, and we really cut it short 11 months, because we don't want to make it seem like that person was so wicked, they need the full 12 months, right? So we do like 11 months.
Nobody comes back before the year?
No. They come back. The reincarnation is instant. If you don't reincarnate and you have to go to Gehenom, so after three strikes.
Somebody dies.
Yeah.
You can say Kaddish for a year.
Right.
So that person then comes
You
back.
see, it's interesting because
What do you do Kaddish for?
it's interesting. When a person dies and you're saying Kaddish, it's almost like on the assumption that was their third chance, they failed again, and they're going to hell for 12 months. So it's like worst case scenario. Chances are, especially if the person was decent and probably a righteous and Shomrei Mitzvotai, loves God, probably they're not actually in Gehenom. Probably they've already reincarnated somewhere else.
But you still need to say Kaddish.
It's still customary to say Kaddish. Yeah.
Maybe they're in the woods.
Still customary to say Kaddish. Keep in mind that it's a custom to say Kaddish. This is something that we really need to devote a lot of time to. Kaddish has become so fundamental to Judaism. In fact, there's an old Hasidic saying that who is the number one best Kiruv rabbi in the world? You've ever heard this Hasidic saying? There's a lot of fantastic Kiruv rabbis out there. But there's an old Hasidic saying that the number one best Kiruv rabbi in the world is Malach HaMavet, is the angel of death. Why? Because every time somebody dies, the people have to go now, the children go to shul for a year to say Kaddish. And that's often how they come back to the Bet Knesset. You know, how many times do you go to shul and you see people who come to shul just to say Kaddish? Like that's the only reason they go to shul. And then when the year's up, you never see them again. Right? Or they stay. The year is up, and now they're actually back and are observing. Because somebody died, they start taking on mitzvot. They want to learn more. They want to do something in memory of the dead. And so that's actually how they come back to Judaism. So there's an old Hasidic saying that the best kiruv is done by Malach HaMavet, because when somebody dies, the family members are, do a little chizuk. They take on mitzvahs. They start going to shul. They start saying Kaddish. So there is such an idea. But if you think about Kaddish, where did it come from? It really needs its own class. I wrote about it before. If you're interested, I can send you the essay. The Rambam, Kaddish itself is a very ancient prayer. The Kaddish is like a 2,000-year-old prayer at least. One of the most ancient Jewish prayers. But Kaddish Yatom, saying Kaddish for the dead, where did that come from? The Rambam, in his whole Mishnah Torah, does not mention such a thing. There's no Kaddish Yatom in the Rambam. In fact, even in the Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch 300 years later, Shulchan Aruch is really a contemporary of the Arizal, Rav Yosef Karo, in the 1500s. The Shulchan Aruch, which we tend to follow very more or less stringently, and Rav Ovadia was very big on following Shulchan Aruch as the main code of law, especially in the land of Israel. Even the Shulchan Aruch, when it talks about Kaddish for the dead, doesn't say you have to say Kaddish for 12 months. So even 500 years ago, in the Shulchan Aruch itself, it doesn't actually say that you need to say, there's no halacha that you have to say Kaddish for 12 months. It's something very recent. The Rambam doesn't even mention it at all. According to the Rambam, there is no Kaddish Yatom. According to Shulchan Aruch, it's just once at the funeral. That's it. So at some point in the past 450 years, this became this universal custom to say Kaddish for a year, which is wonderful. But actually, where does it come from? It came from, really the custom emerged among the Ashkenazim. That's why the Rambam doesn't mention it, because it started as an Ashkenazi custom by the Hasidei Ashkenaz during the Crusades, to mourn the dead that were killed during the Crusades, which we're actually also mourning now, by the way. That's another discussion, is in the Sfirat HaOmer period, we say that we're mourning for Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students. And that is true. And that in itself actually has a really interesting reincarnation, because the number 24,000 you see over and over again, 24,000 people that die in the Tanakh and in rabbinic literature. But actually the earliest sources that speak about mourning during Sfirat HaOmer, they're actually talking about mourning for the Crusades. Those are two topics that need to be explored on their own another time. But Kaddish itself is actually a very recent custom. So it's important to point that out. And now it's become customary to say Kaddish for a year or for 11 months, because worst case scenario, the person's going to be in hell for a maximum of, let's say, 12 months, assuming that they're so wicked that they need like the super extra clean cycle in hell. But generally speaking, that's not necessary. So the suffering of the wicked in Gehenom is up to 12 months. And it's always puzzling that today, just as another aside, there's a number of rabbis out there that love the whole eternal hell thing. They always go out there and they scare people by saying, you're going to burn in hell forever. If you do this, you will burn in hell forever. Eternal hell. You will never come out. I'm always puzzled, like, where do they... there's no hell mentioned in Tanakh. We said that last time. There's no place, Gehenom in Tanakh is literally a place outside of Jerusalem, right? Gehenom is Gei Ben Hinnom, the valley of the son of Hinnom. It's a literal valley outside of Jerusalem. You can go there today. It's a nice little park, walking trail. It's actually quite pleasant. So Gehenom is like a literal place outside of Jerusalem where a lot of sinners congregated, and there was idolatry there and perhaps even human sacrifice. So the Tanakh describes that place as a wicked place. When the Tanakh speaks of Gehenom, it's not talking about an eternal hell. It's talking about a literal, physical, geographical location outside the old city walls of Jerusalem. So Tanakh doesn't speak about eternal damnation in Gehenom. And we said that last time. There's no discussion of heaven and hell in the Chumash or in the Tanakh. No description of heaven and hell. The Mishnah clearly tells you, the actual oral law, the Mishnah clearly tells you that the suffering of the wicked in Gehenom, Reshaim beGehenom, is 12 months. And we'll see what the Arizal says. I mean, the Arizal is telling you the same thing, ultimately. He's saying that most people don't even go to Gehenom. Most people come back and reincarnate. And as long as you're still keeping mitzvot, and you believe in God, and you're not totally wicked, you're going to keep reincarnating for thousands of generations. So where these rabbis get this eternal hell, scaring people that you make a mistake and you're going to burn forever in eternity, I don't know where they get this. They get it from, I know where they get it. They get it from much later sources, much later sources, where did they get it from? I don't know.
Zohar has some explicit punishments for people who do certain things.
Nobody's saying that there's no punishment. It's a fundamental belief that there's reward and punishment, that there's afterlife, no doubt. But the idea of an eternal hell, it doesn't even, not only is there no source for it in Tanakh or in the Mishnah, in the actual authentic early sources, but it doesn't even logically make any sense. Like, why would God make you suffer for eternity? First of all, it makes no sense because we know that God is perfectly just. And God acts midah keneged midah. God acts with mathematical precision. So how does it make any sense that a finite sin in a finite lifespan would deserve an infinity of torture?
It says eternal hell because Gehenom and heaven, these are spiritual realms. So technically, these are timeless realms, these are spaceless realms, they're not
Right.
physical time and space. So if there's no beginning, middle, and end, technically the only time that exists is eternity.
Maybe it feels like it's eternal. Maybe it feels like this is like never ending.
It is here.
But we feel that way too sometimes,
Yeah.
Like if you have little babies and they're not sleeping at night, it feels like an eternity. It feels like an eternity of suffering, right? The feeling of suffering is eternal. That's a different story. But it does end eventually. Logically, the point is, what I'm trying to say is, in terms of the whole idea of midah keneged midah, is that God's punishing is precise. So it makes no mathematical sense. The equation doesn't balance out. That for a finite life, I would get infinite suffering. The math just doesn't add up. It makes no sense. Why would I get billions of eons of years of suffering for, let's say, 80 years of sin? The numbers just don't work. That's not midah keneged midah. That's not precise.
Midah has parameters.
Exactly. A midah is a measure. It has to be measured. Infinity is by definition not measurable. It makes no sense. So the idea of an eternal hell contradicts the principle of midah keneged midah. It doesn't. Not only that, that contradicts the whole principle of God being good. Because if God is good, as we know, and God created you, and God is all-knowing, so God knew when He created you what your ultimate destiny would be, why would God create you to suffer infinity? Is God some sadistic, cruel monster that deliberately made you, put you into this world against your will? You didn't choose to be here. Al korchach ata notzar, al korchach ata nolad, al korchach ata chai, right? In the Mishnah it says you were born against your will, you live against... God brought you here against your will, gave you a yetzer hara and a whole satan and a sitra achra to tempt you and to make you fail. And then when you failed, He puts you in eternity forever to suffer and torture. How does that make sense? In what world does that make sense? In whose mind is this actually logically reasonable? It's the most ridiculous thing ever. It makes no sense. A good God would never create you. A good omnipotent God, all-knowing, omniscient God would never create you and then condemn you to an eternity of hell. It's completely self-defeating and makes no sense. The concept of an eternal hell makes no sense. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I'll tell you where it did come from. It came from Christians and Muslims, right? The early Jewish sources never speak of eternal hell. Christians and Muslims do. And then once Christians and Muslims started believing it and spreading it everywhere, then Jews started believing it. And then after the advent of Christianity and Islam, you see it invading Jewish texts. This is an illogical idea from illogical Christianity and Islam. For them, it's totally consistent because their religions are at their core illogical. So another illogical concept like an eternal hell is perfectly fine for Christians and Muslims. But an eternal hell does not fit in Judaism. And that's really what the Arizal was doing. The Arizal was bringing back the proper understanding of the afterlife. And as we'll see, the Arizal says it's really reincarnation, or if necessary, a short trip through Gehenom. But even that we have to refine. What exactly does that mean? We have to answer all these questions. What does that mean to be in Gan Eden? What does that mean to be in Gehenom? Where's resurrection in all this? The Tchiyat HaMetim, Judgment Day. So we still have to piece it all together. But just since we already brought up the point, the whole notion of an eternal hell makes absolutely no sense. And people will say, I'll get to Kafakela, and people will say, oh, but what about this statement in the Talmud that seems to say eternal hell? What about this statement in the Zohar that seems to say eternal hell? There are many such statements, yes, often metaphorical. Remember, we had a class on understanding the Talmud. There's a lot of things in the Talmud that there are multiple opinions in the Talmud. And we'll see as well what the Talmud says about suffering in the afterlife. There are many different versions, many ideas, and many opinions. So to pull one sentence and say, oh, but this one sentence says, so what? It's one sentence, right? You have to look at everything together. And especially you can't ignore the early sources. You can't ignore the Tanakh. You can't ignore the Mishnah, the actual written law and the actual oral law, which is the Tanakh and the Mishnah, which are really clear. Kafakela, I have it actually right here. It says in Shmuel, some people bring up, what about Kafakela, right? You've heard of Kafakela? This great slingshot, the cosmic slingshot. And sometimes you'll hear people describe it as a torment in hell where you get flung back and forth. Whatever that means. Again, illogical ideas that are very difficult to understand. But let's see what the Arizal said about Kafakela. First of all, where does this idea of a cosmic sling come from? Shmuel says, this is when King David had an encounter with Naval. And we're going to have to go to explore who Naval was. We're going to do all these reincarnations later. Looks like not today at this rate. So, King David had an encounter with Naval. Naval cheated him. And then King David was going to go after him. And Avigail, the wife of Naval, comes to calm King David down. Later, she would be his wife. That's how things worked back then. So Vayakom Adam Lirdofcha, Avigail basically blesses King David and tells him that if a person will arise to seek your soul, levakeshet nafshecha, she's telling King David. Abigail is giving King David a bracha. She was a prophetess also. She's one of the main prophetesses of Israel. And she's saying that if anybody tries to attack you, to take your soul, v'ayta nefesh adoni tzrura b'tzror ha'chaim. Let your soul be bound in the bounds of life. Let your soul stay alive. Ve'et nefesh oevecha, and let the souls of your enemies yikal'ena, God will fling them betoch kafakala. So God will fling your enemies. The souls of your enemies will go to kafakela. They will be flung by this cosmic slingshot. But you should stay alive. If anybody comes after your soul, may your soul be bound to the bounds of life. And may the souls of your enemies be flung like a slingshot. Now, what is this slingshot? Kafakela. And this is what the Arizal says. Again, to silence all those people who think that there's some eternal slingshot tormenting you in hell and bouncing you back and forth from wall to wall or something, the Arizal says, let me explain to you what kafakela means. Veda, you should know, כי הנה הרשעים אחר מיתתם, the wicked after their deaths, נכנסים בגהנום ומקבלים שם עונשם, so after their 3 reincarnations they get their punishment, ומתכפר להם, and they are atoned for, which again implies that there is no eternal hell, because he's saying you go there and you are atoned for, right? Eternal hell means atonement is impossible. Eternal hell means that there's no atonement for what you did, that you're going to suffer for eternity, which then contradicts a whole other principle, that God atones, God forgives. Right? So the concept of eternal hell contradicts so many foundational Jewish principles, it just makes completely no sense. Umishpatam yud bet chodesh, and the Arizal tells you again, the punishment of the wicked is no more than 12 months. Like the Mishnah says, Ve'yesh rashaim shekatuv ba'em, and there are some wicked people of whom it says that nefesh oivecha yikalena betoch kafakala, right? The verse that we just read, that some souls of the wicked are flung in this cosmic sling. So what does this mean? Ve'einam zochim leikanes legehenom, and they don't merit to go to Gehenom achar ptiratam. What are these people? Omnam nafsham olechet midechi el dechi bigilgulim mishunim. That's what kafakela means. To be flung like a slingshot back and forth means your soul is being flung from body to body in gilgulim, in reincarnations. So kafakela just means reincarnation. It's just a biblical word for reincarnation. The word gilgul, reincarnation that we use today, doesn't appear in the Tanakh. So what is the actual scriptural word for reincarnation? Kafakela. The Arizal says kafakela is just reincarnation, that's all. Which makes perfect sense. You're being flung. What does that mean you're being flung? Your soul's being flung from one body to another. Right? From one sling to another. The rock in a different sling, in a different sling. You're being flung back and forth. That's all.
So the dibuk and all that stuff. Where
And he says what we all are, Adi marek onsho ktsat, until he gets enough suffering that he merits, ve'yuchal leikanes achar kach begehenom yud bet chodesh. And then he'll go to hell for 12 months, leitkaper legamre, to be perfectly cleansed. So again, the Arizal is telling you there is no eternal hell. You go up to 12 months and then you are done legamre. You are perfectly, even for the most rasha gamur, even for the most wicked rashaim. God gave them 3 chances. He flung them back and forth, kafakela, in 3 reincarnations. They're still haven't improved. The tikkun's not done. Now they can go to Gehenom for up to 12 months. And we're good. That's it. We'll see what happens after that. Because he's saying, le'itkaper legamre. That means they've been atoned for. That means their atonement has been achieved. Right?
So does that mean that everyone has a place in the world to come?
Ultimately.
Don't we say all Israel has a place?
Yeah, Kol Israel yesh lahem chelek l'olam haba.
What does it mean?
Yeah, but the Mishnah continues and says, ve'elu she'en lahem chelek l'olam haba. So, yeah. So the Zohar says the same thing, by the way, if you need another source. An earlier source before the Arizal. The Zohar says in a section called Sabad Mishpatim, Ve'ech mitgalgelin nishmatin, how do souls reincarnate? How do souls reincarnate? What is the analogy? Ke'avna bekuspita, like a stone in a sling. Kama de'atamar, and this is the meaning of the verse, Ve'et nefesh oevecha yikalena betoch kafakela. So the Zohar is saying this already, not just the Arizal. The Zohar, Rashbi, is telling you that what is the metaphor for reincarnation? Like a stone being flung from a sling. And this is the meaning of kafakela. So kafakela is reincarnation. So why do people reincarnate? What exactly? Let's be more precise in our definitions. So a person's righteous, a person's wicked. What exactly merits reincarnation? Lama mitgalgelim. This is still Shara Gilgulim. Back to Shara Gilgulim. Souls reincarnate for several reasons. First reason, the first reason is because you transgressed an actual prohibition. You're not supposed to do something and you did it. And you have to come and rectify that and not do it. You're going to keep trying until you stop doing it. The second reason is a positive commandment. So if you failed to fulfill a positive commandment, not that you transgressed something forbidden, but that you failed to fulfill something that you were supposed to, that you were commanded to. Like it could be tefillin, tzitzit, whatever. Something that's actually a positive thing that you need to do. Ashlishit, the third reason, sheba letzorech acherim. You might come back not because of you, but because you're needed for other people. Right? Uleadricham uletaknam, to fix other people. That's a more positive reason to reincarnate. Sometimes God needs you back here for some other reason, as part of somebody else's plan. Od yesh sibot acherot. So those are the first three, and then there's some other ones. Ve'eluem ki lefamim mitgalgel likach et bat zugo. Sometimes you reincarnate because you didn't marry your soulmate. So you're going to have to come back and marry the right soulmate. Chances are you married your soulmate though. But let's say you didn't. You didn't marry your soulmate, you might have to come back. Right, yeah. We talked about 18 soulmates before. You might come back to marry, maybe you married soulmate number 3, and you might have to come back to marry soulmate number 1. Because they are in rank order, hierarchical order, that there's your number 1 soulmate, like the Bathsheba to David, and then there's like number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they're all soulmates, but then maybe you can do better next time. So, and upamim shekvar lakach bat zugo. Sometimes you did marry your soulmate. So you did marry your soulmate, but you messed it up. So now you're going to have to come back and fix it. So either you didn't marry your soulmate or you did and you messed it up. Then we go into more detail a little bit. So you have to fulfill all 613 commandments. Not just in action, but also in speech and also in thought. In all 3 aspects of the mitzvah. And there are some mitzvahs that you can't do because, like, we don't have a temple, for instance, or you're not a Kohen, or you're not a woman or a man or whatever. But by learning about it, by the study of that mitzvah, that actually also qualifies as, that's part of dibur and machshava, that you can also fulfill a mitzvah that you're unable to through no fault of your own. Like there's no temple, so I can't go to the temple and bring offerings. But that's why we do korbanot. We recite korbanot and we study them in the Gemara and in the Tanakh and whatever. And by doing that, we can kind of de facto fulfill the mitzvah. Right, it's a more mystical fulfillment. And the Tanakh allows us to do that, by the way. This isn't an invention of the rabbis. Why? Because in the Tanakh itself, it says, "Uneshalma parim sfatenu." We can pay the cows with our lips. That's a verse in the Tanakh. The prophets tell us that you can also fulfill your temple duties with your lips, by reading about it, by teaching. So it's not a rabbinic invention. It's actually straight out of the prophets. And that's what the Arizal says, that al pasuk zot Torah le'olah u'lemincha kol ha'osek beparashat olah ki'ilu ikriv olah. Everybody who studies the olah offering, the sacrifice, the olah sacrifice, anybody who studies it, it's as if he actually did it. So a person will keep coming back until he fulfilled even those mitzvahs. So if you haven't been saying your korbanot, and you haven't been, for a Jew specifically, obviously, non-Jews also reincarnate, but for a Jewish person who has to do Taryag mitzvot, then you would have to come back until you even covered those ones, even the study, all aspects of Torah study. And in terms of fulfilling the mitzvah of Torah study, we've said this before, that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of Torah study unless you studied on all 4 levels. Shesimanam pardes ve'em pshat remez drash sod. We all know this, right? There's 4 levels of learning the Torah. Pshat, the simple stories. Remez, the allusions, the lessons and all that. The drash, the metaphors, the analogies, the allegories. And sod, the secrets, the codes, the mysticism, the Kabbalah. Right? There's 4 levels of Torah study. You can't just study Pshat your whole life, which a lot of people do nowadays. Pshat and Remez, Pshat and Remez, Pshat and Remez. Doesn't work that way. You have to go deeper. You have to go Drash, you have to go Sod. You have to understand Torah on all 4 levels. So the Arizal says, if you don't fulfill the mitzvah, if you don't study Torah on all 4 levels, tzarich sheitgalgel, you're going to reincarnate. So some people say, oh no, I don't want to touch Kabbalah, I don't do mysticism, I don't do Zohar, I don't do the Arizal. Okay, so you'll come back, you'll do it next time. Right? But you might not want to do the Zohar, but the Zohar wants to do you, right? So it's going to come for you, if not in this world and in the next world.
So the fact that yeshiva kids don't do any seinach.
Well, they're still kids. It's not the students that are the problem, it's the Rebbeim that are the problem. Listen, maybe all these kids in the Ashkenazi yeshivot, the Haredi ones, maybe they're the reincarnations of Sephardis who only learned Zohar in the past generation. So because they only did Kabbalah and Zohar, now they come back and here, I'll put you in an Ashkenazi yeshiva, you just sit and learn Gemara all day and fulfill your, make up for all the stuff you didn't learn. So it could be that too, who knows? God has his ways. So everything has a reason for existing. And of course, you don't necessarily just come back as a human. כי הנה אחר פטירת האדם נפרעים ממנו על חטאותיו, קודם שיקנסו בגיהנום בהרבה מציאות של עונש, וכולם נקראים גלגולים. All the different things are called, all the different punishments that you can go through are called reincarnations. רוצה לומר כי יתגלגל או בדומם, you can be reincarnated even in an inanimate matter. או בצמח, צומח, או בחי, או במדבר. You can come back in another human. But also a part of your soul can come back in a stone and in a plant and in an animal.
This is legit in Judaism. Is that
Yes, this is legit, exactly. It's not just in Buddhism. You can come back. It's a form of, he's saying onesh, it's a form of suffering.
If you come back, especially as a domain.
Right. Imagine being an animal and being conscious in an animal's body. That's a form of suffering.
Being conscious in a rock where you sit for 10,000 years before. No, seriously, that's the idea.
And he's saying, "Ukim'at rov bnei ha'adam," and pretty much all human beings, rov bnei ha'adam, lo imaltu meleitgalgel begilgulim ele. Basically, everybody is reincarnating. Nobody's spared reincarnation. והטעם הוא כי אינו יכול לקבל עונשו עד שיהיה מוגשם בגוף ונפש. And the reason is, and he's actually quoting from a Talmud. He's saying the reason that it has to be this way. Why do people have to come back to suffer their punishment? Because, very simple. והטעם הוא כי אינו יכול לקבל עונשו עד שיהיה מוגשם בגוף ונפש. You can't actually suffer until body and soul go together. ואז בהתגלגלו שם סובל ומרגיש הצער ההוא. You can't actually suffer unless you are back in your body. The body and the soul have to come back together. Then you can properly suffer. Can a soul really suffer? A soul is like the spiritual, ethereal thing. It has no body. Does a soul have feelings? The body feels pleasures and the body feels pain. Does a soul really feel pain?
Yes.
No.
It's a consciousness that is very...
But that's tied to your body. Because your brain is just a sensor that is perceiving things. You are perceiving sight, you're perceiving sound, you're perceiving touch, taste, smell, time, space, whatever. You have all these senses. Your brain, or you, are perceiving things. Your thoughts in your head are just more electrical signals. Just like touch and smell and taste, those are just electrical signals. The soul itself, can the soul itself actually suffer? The Arizal is saying, and we're going to see where he gets this from. The Arizal is saying the soul can't suffer. The body suffers. The body is capable of feeling pain. The body feels pleasure, the body feels pain. The soul, in order for you to suffer, you actually have to come back to your body. And he says this is the only way, mitchaprim avonotav, the only way to cleanse your sins is to come back into a body. You have to come back into the physical world. And by the way, this is the deeper meaning. We said Gehenom before. This is the deeper meaning of why our sages said Gehenom is hell. Gehenom is not hell. Gehenom is a park outside Jerusalem. What was meant by that is, Gehenom is here. And so is Gan Eden, for that matter. Gan Eden and Gehenom are both here. And if you do Gematria, since we like Gematria, the value of Gan Eden and the value of Gei Ben Inom is the same. It's 177. They're equal. Gan Eden and Gehenom equal. They're both here. You get your rewards and punishments, your pleasures and pains in this world. And we talked about this briefly when we talked about Arba'a shenichnesu bepardes. You can re-listen to that, it'll make more sense now. When we said towards the end of that class, Arba'a shenichnesu bepardes, and about the idea of a singular domain in the cosmos, of heaven and earth. There is that.
We're going over and over about the suffering, but in some place, in some moment, we also talk about that Genom is here, but also Gan Eden is here. So I believe that there has to be a Gilgul.
Right.
in order to understand that, we have to actually have pleasure in life here when we live.
Yes, absolutely. And the Torah throughout says that. Do what you're supposed to, be a good person, and you're going to live amazing. So I'm going to bless you, you're going to have tons of stuff, material wealth, right? You're going to have all the produce and all the gold and all the silver and lots of children, and you're going to be healthy. It's all like very physical, material pleasures. So the Arizal says the only way to actually suffer and atone for your sins is Beit Galgelo, to reincarnate, umargish atzarahu, and then you will feel tzar, then you will feel pain, ve'aliyadken mitkabrim avonotav, and then you can atone for your sins and rectify. Where did he get this from? Famous Gemara in Sanhedrin, and maybe we'll do this one, and then we'll pause and we'll continue next week. So what does it say in Sanhedrin? You remember Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who compiled the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi had a famous study partner who was not even Jewish, who was Antoninus, right? The Roman Emperor Antoninus. Some say that it's the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Maybe, you know Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, but probably most people don't know Meditations, but most people know Gladiator, the movie with Russell Crowe. The emperor at the beginning of the film is Marcus Aurelius. He was one of the philosopher kings of Rome. He wrote also Meditations and like various philosophical treatises. So in the Talmud, there's many discussions between Rabbi Yehuda Anasi and Antoninus. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus was his full name. Marcus Aurelius' name. So some people say that's who is the emperor. And Amar le Antoninus le Rebbe. So in one of these conversations, Antoninus challenges Rabbi Yehuda Anasi and says, Guf unshama, the body and the soul can both exempt themselves from judgment. Ketzad, how? Guf omer, neshama chatat, shemiyom shepirsha mimeni, areni mutal ke'even domem bakever. The body is going to say, hey, I didn't do anything. I'm just a mass of matter. I'm just like domem. I'm like nothing. I'm just a rock. The soul is what animated me. It's the soul that sinned, not the body. I'm just the body. I don't do anything. It's the soul that sinned. And as soon as the soul left me, look, I'm dead. Like the body is just a hump of mass on the ground. So the body is going to say, why should I suffer? It's the soul that made all those decisions. I didn't do anything. Uneshama omeret, guf chata. But the body sinned. The soul's going to say, no, the body sinned. Shemiyom shepirashti mimeno, areni porachat ba'avir katzipor. From the day that I left my body, look, I'm spiritual. I'm floating up to heaven. Right? The soul is pure. I only sinned because I had a body, a materialistic body with all of its desires and temptations. So Antoninus is telling Rebbe, Antoninus heard this whole idea of, this is already in Christian times, so he heard this idea of eternal hell, heaven, punishment, some spirit souls in heaven or in Gehenom suffering. He said, that makes no sense. Antoninus is telling Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, that makes no sense. Why would the soul suffer for something that the body did? The soul's going to say, I didn't do anything. I'm pure. It's the body that did the sins. And the body is going to say, what did I do? I'm just a finite hump of mass. I did nothing without the soul. That's what Antoninus told Rebbe. So then, and the Rebbe says, Amar le emshol lecha mashal, I'm going to give you a parable. Lema davar domeh. So the Rabbi Yehuda Anasi answered him with a parable. Lemelech basar v'dam. Imagine you have a king, a human king. Shayalo pardes na'eh. Note the term pardes too, right? Rabbi Yehuda Anasi is challenging you to think about this more deeply. Right? He could have used many analogies. He specifically uses the analogy of a pardes. That's not a coincidence, obviously. Every word is meaningful. Saying, put your thinking, don't stop being pshat, man. Right? Stop thinking silly, immature ideas that they tell children. Start thinking like an actual philosopher. He's saying, I'll give you an analogy. Think about a pardes, an orchard. Pardes na'eh, ve'ayabo bechorot ne'ot. So it had beautiful fruits. Ve'hoshiv bo shnei shomrim. And the king put 2 guards to guard this pardes, to guard this orchard. Echad chiger ve'echad suma. One is lame and one is blind. Amar lo chiger lesuma. So the lame told the blind, Bechorot ne'ot ani roeh bepardes. He says, hey, I see all these beautiful fruits. The lame one told the blind one, says, look, this garden is full of beautiful fruits. So what are we going to do? let me climb on your shoulders. I can see them, but I'm lame. So I can't climb the trees because I'm lame, but I can see them. You can't see them, but you're perfectly fine to climb. So you stand, I'll climb on your shoulders, I'll pick the fruits, and we both have fun, and we both eat the fruits. That's what he told him, right? So he climbed, ve'aviyum ve'achlum, he climbed on top of him, the lame climbed on top of the blind, they, ate everything from the garden. Le'amim ba ba'al pardes, then the king comes back, amar lehem bechorot neot eichan, what happened to all my beautiful fruits? What happened to my garden? And what happened? Amar lo chiger, klum yesh li raglaim le'aloch bahen. So the lame one said, it wasn't me. I don't have legs. You think I could have climbed the trees and taken all the fruits? I don't have nothing. It wasn't me. And Amar lo suma, klum yesh li einayim lirot. I have no eyes. I didn't see anything. So the lame one says, wasn't me. I don't have legs. The blind one says, hey, well, it wasn't me. I can't see. Right? So what did he do? Ma'asa, irkiv chiger al gabei suma. So the king put the lame one on the blind one's shoulders, vedan otam ke'echad, and judged them together. You guys did it together, so I'm going to judge you together. And so, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi says, Afa kadosh baruch hu mevi neshama. God also brings the body, vezolka baguf. He puts it back into the body, vedan otam ke'echad, and then he judges them together. Shene'emar, as it says in Tehillim, Yikareh l'shamayim me'al ve'el ha'aretz ladin amo. It's a verse in Tehillim that says God is calling on the heavens. He's bringing the souls from the heavens, bringing them back down to the earth to judge them. Me'al zu neshama ve'el ha'aretz ladin amo ze haguf. So God takes the soul, brings it back into the body, and only then can judgment be done. Very simple. Right? Rabbi Yehuda Anasi is telling you exactly what we've been saying. He solves Antoninus' problem. Antoninus clearly challenges him by saying, do you really believe these childish notions of eternal hell and damnation and so on? Rabbi Yehuda Anasi says, no, don't listen to that nonsense. We know exactly what it is. The Tanakh never speaks of that stuff. The Tanakh only ever tells us about reincarnation, and it's explicit in Job and elsewhere, and resurrection, which we're going to get to. Those are basically your only options. There's reincarnation and there's resurrection. And that's what the Arizal did as well, to bring it back. The Arizal brought back the authentic sources to filter out the nonsensical ideas that crept into Judaism over the centuries. I think this is a good place to stop for now, and we'll continue.